You think losing half your paycheck in a divorce is a modern legal tragedy? You are completely wrong. Women have been extracting a survival tax from men for 3.3 million years. Today, men constantly complain about being used for their money. You take a woman on a date, you pay for the expensive dinner, and she ghosts you. You hear horror stories of men losing their homes and their savings to pay alimony after a brutal breakup. It feels like the modern legal system was entirely designed to punish men and extract their resources. But the court system did not invent this dynamic. Your DNA did. The modern woman who asks about your career and your salary on a first date is not just being a gold digger. She is running a deeply ingrained prehistoric background check. To understand why women evolved to demand this invisible financial tax, we have to travel back to the darkest era of human evolution. Let's rewind exactly 3.3 million years ago to the harsh African savanna. Our ancestors were undergoing a radical physical transformation. They were coming down from the trees and beginning to walk upright on two legs. This transition to bipedalism was a massive evolutionary advantage for traveling long distances, but it created a terrifying, life-threatening crisis for the prehistoric female. Because the female pelvis had to change shape to allow for upright walking, the birth canal became significantly narrower. This created a brutal biological ultimatum. Human babies had to be born completely underdeveloped, essentially half-baked, or their heads would be too large to fit through the pelvis. Because of this, human infants became the most helpless creatures on the planet. A baby horse can run a few hours after being born. A prehistoric human baby was completely useless and required years of constant, exhausting care. A mother had to carry a screaming, heavy infant in her arms at all times. This made her incredibly slow and vulnerable. She could not run from a pack of starving hyenas. She could not track, hunt, and kill a wild deer. She was effectively paralyzed by motherhood, but she still needed massive amounts of calories to survive and produce milk. If she tried to survive on her own, she and her baby would be dead in a matter of days. She desperately needed someone else to bleed and sweat for her calories. In the rest of the animal kingdom, the mating rules are brutally simple. The male mates with the female, his genetic job is done, and he immediately leaves. The prehistoric woman could absolutely not afford this. If the man mated and walked away into the tall grass, she would starve to death. Her entire bloodline would be erased. So, female biology had to invent a ruthless way to force the male to stick around and work for her. She had to create the very first biological contract, and the only currency she had to enforce this contract was sexual access. But there was a massive problem. How do you keep a man working for you after he already gets what he wants? This is where prehistoric female biology pulled off a terrifying genius trick of behavioral control. In almost all other mammal species, females have a visible heat cycle. They show clear physical signs when they are fertile and ready to reproduce. The male mates during this narrow window, knows his job is done, and walks away. Human women evolved to completely hide their fertility. This phenomenon is known by evolutionary biologists as concealed ovulation, and it was a weapon of mass manipulation. Because the prehistoric man never knew exactly when the woman was fertile, he couldn't just mate once and leave. If he wanted to guarantee that his genetics were passed on, he had to mate with her constantly, all month long. And to get that constant, exclusive access, he had to pay a continuous, heavy price. He had to wake up every single day, face the absolute horrors of the savanna, hunt dangerous animals, and bring the best cuts of meat back to her fire. He was trapped on an endless evolutionary hamster wheel. He was paying the very first form of continuous alimony, sacrificing his own physical safety just to keep his place in her life. This ancient biological contract is exactly why you feel so much crushing pressure to be a provider today. When you lose your job or when your bank account is low, you feel a deep, sickening sense of worthlessness. That is not just a modern economic fear. That is an ancient evolutionary panic. Your nervous system knows that if you stop providing resources, your prehistoric contract is void. You are failing the basic requirement of your existence. You feel this pressure because millions of years ago, the men who refused to pay the survival tax were genetically wiped out. The women simply let them die alone. But what happened if a prehistoric man tried to break this contract? What if he decided he was tired of hunting for her, and he wanted to keep the meat for himself or give it to a younger woman? The prehistoric woman did not have a modern judge to force him to pay. Instead, she weaponized the entire tribe against him. Prehistoric tribes operated on strict collective survival. If a man abandoned his mate and his child, that starving mother and baby became a massive burden on the rest of the camp. The tribe could not afford to feed another man's family. So, the group became the prehistoric court system. If a man tried to dodge his alimony, the collective group would punish him brutally. The other men would isolate him, refuse to share fire with him, and publicly humiliate him. The women would spread vicious rumors, permanently destroying his social reputation. He would be socially starved and pushed to the dangerous edges of the camp. This ancient social execution is the exact origin of the modern legal system that forces men to surrender their assets today. But here is the most disturbing part of this entire evolutionary system. Not every man had to pay this heavy, exhausting tax. The prehistoric women created two completely different sets of rules, dividing the male population into two distinct classes. The massive, dominant alpha males of the tribe did not pay alimony. They did not have to hunt for a specific woman every single day just to keep her around. The alphas operated completely outside the law of the contract. They took what they wanted through pure physical intimidation and unbothered dominance. Their genetic quality, their raw strength, and their emotional stoicism were so highly valued that the women's biological filters simply bypassed the need for a financial contract. The women submitted to the alphas automatically, craving their superior genetics. The men who were forced to pay the tax, the men who were trapped in the grueling labor contract, were exclusively the beta males. The lower status men were reduced to biological ATMs. They traded their sweat, their blood, and their daily survival just for a chance to reproduce. They were essentially disposable workers, slaves to the female survival strategy. They were building the foundations of human civilization, but they were doing it out of pure desperation. And for a very long time, the beta males accepted this miserable fate. They paid their prehistoric alimony because they thought it was the only way to secure a woman's loyalty. But they were incredibly naive. The beta males did not realize that the women were playing a much darker, much more dangerous game behind their backs. The females had secured the beta males' meat and protection, but their ancient biology was still violently craving the genetics of the alpha. And to satisfy this craving, prehistoric women developed a covert strategy of betrayal that is still destroying millions of marriages today. The beta males of the prehistoric world were working under a massive biological illusion. They believed that because they were paying the daily survival tax, they had successfully secured their genetic future. They brought the meat to the fire, they protected the camp from nocturnal predators, and they provided the physical labor needed to keep the woman and her child alive. They thought the biological contract was fair, but they completely underestimated the ruthless ingenuity of female biology. Concealed ovulation was not just a tool to keep the beta male working. It was also the perfect evolutionary smokescreen for a dark and necessary betrayal. Because the woman's fertile window was completely hidden, the beta male had no idea when she was actually capable of getting pregnant. He just had to guard her constantly. But a prehistoric woman knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that the beta male was a great provider, but his genetics were fundamentally weak. If her child inherited his anxiety, his smaller frame, and his lack of dominance, that child would likely die on the harsh savanna. She needed the beta's meat, but she desperately needed the alpha's bloodline. This evolutionary conflict birthed the dual mating strategy. It is the most terrifying and effective behavioral adaptation in human history. The prehistoric woman would maintain her contract with the beta male, acting like a loyal mate to ensure he kept bringing food. But during the very short, invisible window when she was actually fertile, she would covertly seek out the dominant alpha male. She would mate with the alpha in secret, securing his superior immune system, his physical strength, and his unbothered psychological resilience for her child. Then she would return to the beta male's fire. The beta male, completely blind to her biological timing, would raise the alpha's child as his own. He would spend the rest of his short, brutal life hunting, bleeding, and fighting predators to protect a bloodline that was not even his. In the harsh mathematics of evolution, this is the ultimate defeat. The beta male's genetics were entirely erased from history, while he did all the heavy lifting to ensure the alpha's legacy survived. He was not just a provider, he was an evolutionary slave. If you ever wonder why modern women seem to settle down with nice, accommodating guys, but are secretly obsessed with dominant, unapologetic men, you are looking at the exact same dual mating strategy in action. Modern society tells you that being a reliable provider is the key to a woman's heart, but your ancient biology knows the dark truth. A woman's logical brain appreciates your stability, but her primitive nervous system only feels burning, primal desire for the man who does not have to pay the survival tax. This same leadership instinct that the first men carried in their blood is detailed in the Ancestral Alpha Male Manual, link in the description. By understanding these ancient triggers, you can stop your body from betraying you in high-pressure social situations and reclaim your dominant posture. Because when prehistoric men slowly started to realize they were being genetically scammed, the environment turned into a psychological war zone. The beta males could not just abandon the women, because the tribe would punish them, but they also could not afford to raise another man's child. This intense paranoia forced the male brain to evolve a new, deeply painful psychological alarm system. This system is the exact origin of modern romantic jealousy. When you see your partner talking to a taller, more confident man, and you feel that sudden, crushing heat in your chest, that is not a modern insecurity. That is a prehistoric survival mechanism screaming at you. Your ancient DNA is terrified that the dual mating strategy is happening right in front of your eyes. Your nervous system is warning you that the delicate contract you signed is about to be broken, and you are about to be replaced by the very alpha your ancestors feared. To fight back against this female deception, ancient men developed extreme hypervigilance. They became obsessed with mate guarding. They monitored every single interaction, every glance, and every movement their partner made within the tribe. They created strict social rules and heavy consequences for female betrayal. They tried to build a cultural fence around the women to ensure their own genetics were the ones surviving. But the women did not surrender easily. They were locked in an evolutionary arms race with the men. If the men were going to become hypervigilant, the women had to become masters of psychological manipulation. They evolved a highly sophisticated biological lie detector. A prehistoric woman could look at a man and instantly read his micro-expressions. She could smell the subtle changes in his stress hormones. She knew exactly when a beta male was trying to fake being an alpha, and because her survival depended on correctly identifying a man's true nature, she developed a brutal method to strip away his mask. She created a psychological test so aggressive and so confusing that it still destroys millions of modern relationships today. A test designed to trigger a complete emotional collapse in weak men. Prehistoric women faced a terrifying biological dilemma. They had developed the ability to read male micro-expressions and detect hidden fear, but they could not afford to wait for a real crisis to happen. If a woman waited for a pack of starving dire wolves to attack the camp, to find out if her beta male provider was actually a coward, it would be too late. If he froze in panic during a real predator attack, she and her child would be eaten alive. She needed a way to simulate danger. She needed a way to push a man's nervous system to the absolute breaking point in a controlled environment, just to observe how his biology reacted under pressure. So, prehistoric females developed a highly aggressive psychological mechanism. They began to intentionally provoke the men. Evolutionary biologists call this a fitness test. The women would suddenly challenge a man's authority. They would act completely dismissive, show sudden coldness, or create unnecessary conflict out of thin air. They were not doing this because they were naturally chaotic. They were doing this because they were running a deeply ingrained life or death diagnostic check on the man's emotional stability. They were actively trying to trigger a panic response. When a prehistoric woman tested a beta male, his reaction was instantaneous and completely disastrous. You have to remember that the beta male's status in the tribe was incredibly fragile. His entire existence and his access to reproduction were built on that grueling daily alimony contract. He believed that as long as he provided the meat, she would be happy. So, when she suddenly acted cold or provoked him, He felt his entire biological reality crumbling. He feared that his contract was being terminated. His ancient brain flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone. His breathing became shallow. His voice pitched up. He became defensive, overly emotional, and desperately tried to appease her. He would apologize frantically, trying to restore the peace and prove his loyalty. He thought he was saving his relationship, but he was actually destroying it forever. This emotional volatility was the ultimate biological failure. It proved to the prehistoric woman's nervous system that this man was not a fortress. If he could not even handle a simple psychological provocation from her, how could he possibly protect her from the terrifying monsters waiting in the dark? His panic was a genetic white flag. It told the female that he was a profound liability. In that exact moment, her biological switch flipped. Her primal attraction shut down completely and permanently. He was entirely locked in the prehistoric friend zone, reduced back to nothing but a disposable worker. But the alpha males reacted to these psychological stress tests in a completely different way. When a prehistoric woman challenged a dominant alpha or acted suddenly dismissive, he did not panic. His reality was not dependent on her approval, and his status was not built on a fragile alimony contract. His nervous system was anchored deeply in his own physical power and environmental control. When tested, the alpha male remained grounded, unbothered, and emotionally immovable. He absorbed her psychological pressure without blinking. He might ignore the provocation entirely, or he might just look at her with dead calm eyes and smile. This unshakable emotional stoicism signaled absolute genetic superiority. It told the woman's primal brain that this man was the most dangerous thing in the environment. He did not fear her disapproval, and he did not fear the dark. This stoicism short-circuited her anxiety and triggered a massive, overwhelming wave of biological attraction, securing his place as the dominant mate. This exact same ancient filtering system is constantly running in the background of your interactions today. When the woman you are dating suddenly pulls away, takes hours to text back, or picks an argument over something entirely trivial, your prehistoric biology is being put on trial. And the terrifying truth is that most modern men completely fail this test before they even realize it has begun. Think about how you react when a woman suddenly acts distant. You flood with anxiety. You double text her. You ask her what you did wrong. You buy her gifts to apologize for things you did not even do. You try to use logic to solve an emotional trap. The moment you do this, you are signaling the exact same chemical crash as the ancient beta male. You are showing her that your reality is easily shaken by her behavior. Modern society tells you to communicate your feelings, to show your vulnerability, and to always compromise in these moments. Society tells you that the nice guy approach is the mature way to handle romantic conflict. But your DNA does not care about modern social theories. Your DNA responds to strength, stability, and emotional stoicism. When you show panic and desperation in the face of romantic pressure, you are telling the modern tribe that you are weak. You are proving that you belong at the cold edge of the fire, waiting to be picked off by the predators. The tragedy of the modern man is that he is completely blind to this ancient game. He thinks he is failing at dating because he does not make enough money, or because he is not tall enough or good-looking enough. He does not realize that he is failing because his nervous system is constantly broadcasting the invisible scent of prehistoric defeat. You are playing a civilized, logical game of romance, while women are still subconsciously playing a savage, million-year-old game of genetic survival. Worse still, the modern environment has weaponized this biological fear. The ancient beta male experienced this kind of psychological testing maybe a dozen times in his entire life, entirely within his small tribe. The modern man on a dating app experiences hundreds of micro-rejections and tests every single week. You swipe on hundreds of profiles, and the silence you receive in return is processed by your ancient brain as a massive collective banishment from the tribe. Every ignored message floods your system with stress hormones. Men today are walking around with chronic evolutionary trauma, completely terrified of interacting with women. They are retreating into isolation because their biology is screaming that the tribe has deemed them worthless. But what if you could hack this ancient system? What if you could flip the genetic switch in your own nervous system and signal to the world that you are no longer the disposable sentinel at the edge of the camp? You are not a prisoner to this ancient biology, but to break free, you must completely destroy the beta programming that society has forced upon you, and you must awaken the dormant alpha stoicism that your ancestors used to conquer the world. To break this ancient beta programming, you must first understand a brutal biological truth. The prehistoric savanna that designed your nervous system no longer exists. There are no dire wolves waiting outside your door, but your physical body does not know this. Your DNA still believes that a woman's rejection is a literal death sentence. It still believes you must pay the daily survival tax to exist. You are currently trapped in an evolutionary ghost story. The only way to escape is to manually override your own nervous system. You must emulate the exact psychological markers of the ancient alpha male. How did the alpha bypass the alimony contract? How did he completely short-circuit the female fitness test? He did it by mastering the ultimate biological weapon. He mastered the power of absolute, unbreakable stillness. In the wild, erratic movement is always a sign of prey. Prey animals are always twitching, scanning, and reacting in panic. Apex predators operate entirely differently. They are unbothered. They conserve their energy. A dominant predator does not react to minor provocations. It knows that it is in total control of the environment. When a prehistoric woman tested an alpha male, she wanted to see him twitch. She wanted to see his reality break under her pressure, but he gave her absolutely nothing. His heart rate did not spike. His breathing remained deep and slow. He simply looked at her with dead calm eyes. This stillness terrified and intoxicated the female nervous system. It was the ultimate proof of environmental dominance. It proved he was not a disposable worker. It proved he was a king of the savanna. You have to bring this exact same primal stillness into your modern life. When a woman acts cold today, you do not panic. When she takes hours to reply, you do not double text her. When she tests your emotional frame, you do not try to logic your way out. You simply hold your ground. You let her emotional chaos crash against your stoic reality. The moment you stop reacting, her ancient biological radar gets deeply confused. She expects the panicked beta male response. She expects you to desperately try to restore the contract. When she gets the unbothered alpha silence instead, a massive evolutionary switch flips in her brain. Her anxiety is instantly replaced by deep, primal respect. Her nervous system realizes that you are not a man she can manipulate. You are a man her biology tells her she must follow. You are no longer the desperate beta paying a daily survival tax. You are operating completely outside the prehistoric contract. You are signaling that you hold the ultimate power, but this requires killing the nice guy inside you. The modern world trained that nice guy to be weak. It trained him to be agreeable, submissive, and constantly apologetic. You must burn that modern conditioning to the ground entirely. You must reconnect with the violent, dominant legacy of your ancestors. The men who survived the ancient world did not do it by being nice. They survived because they were dangerous, stoic, and unshakable. Every single time you face a high-pressure social situation, you have a choice. You can let the ancient beta programming flood your veins with cortisol. You can panic, apologize, and retreat to the cold edges of the fire. Or you can take a deep breath and hack your own DNA. You can choose to project the dark, immovable energy of the men who ruled the ancient world. You carry their blood in your veins right now. You have their exact genetics. You just forgot how to use them. It is time to remember who you really are. Ancestral Alpha. Male Manual is in the link in the description. Click now and discover the instinct that every man carries, but few know how to use to regain your leadership posture, self-confidence, and respect.